yeah, when it comes to like say a lot of folks that grew up in the 70s and the 60s and all that, one thing that was relatively big was the growth of comics. You know, it was still big back in the 80s and the 90s, but over the years, well, you know, say, you know, when you think about it, like, say, yes, comic book movies are still big. You know, Deadpool and Wolverine, currently the highest grossing R-rated movie at the moment. That could always change. But, when you think about it, like, say, sadly, the world of comics, like, you know, like, hey, like, I'm gonna go get Star Slammers, or something like that. Let's see how much this is, and all that stuff. You think, like, say, huh. Like, sadly, you don't really see unless you are a collector, or unless you are going to a, comic book store. Sometimes you don't always see, hey, a lot of classics and all that. But, one, like, you know, magazine that really helped push it, like, you know, like, the idea of comics, and, you know, and also, or, like, you know, like, movies, anime, and all that stuff, to the mainstream, that, you know, besides just, you know, like, say, hey, you know, the dorky guy, or something like that, was Wizard, or Wizard, the magazine of comics, entertainment, and pop culture. It was also known as Wizard, the Guide to Comics, and Wizard, the Comics Magazine. It was a magazine about comic books that was published monthly in the United States by Wizard Entertainment from July 1991 to January 2011. So we're going to try and talk about, like, say, how it, you know, came from where it started to sadly when it fell. It launched in July 1991 with issue number 7. The magazine switched to a glossy paper and color printing, and it strongly supported publishers buying comics and Image Comics. If you're wondering exactly of, like, say, a character from Valiant Comics, an example would be the character Bloodsport. I also want to know, like, say, Image Comics. That sounds fairly interesting. Like, what characters were they from? Well, they did, like, say, characters like, say, Spawn, The Walking Dead. They did Invincible, Kick-Ass, and quite a lot of others. Both companies were, like, say, artists that were from, like, DC or Marvel, and then they thought they wanted to do their own things because Marvel or DC thought, not really our thing, or something like that. This magazine, it was a bit of an incident with a monthly circulation of more than 100,000 copies. And, you know, one thing it would also do, it was in a way say, it would say, hey, you know, if you want another, like, a magazine that, you know, would talk about different other things, well, then you would go to Toy Fair for toys and action figures, Inquest Gamer for collectible game cards, Anime Insider for anime and manga, and Toy Wishes for mainstream toy enthusiasts. But, you know, like, say, some of these magazines aren't still going in production. Like, this sounds fairly cool. One thing it had a price guide. So, like, if you're really, say, a price guide, well, think of it this way. Nowadays, when it comes to comics and all that, nowadays you'll be able to, like, say, I can go into my phone or something like that, and I'll be able to say, hey, how much is this classic? Like, say I have a Swamp Thing. How much would the original, like, House of Secrets, how much would that originally cost if you had a copy of that? Anyway, that's what it would do at that time. Because, you know, we didn't have the use of the internet or a wide catalog to be able to just go, or no, that you'd have to be able to, like, search a specific example or something, or they would have a big lineup of, like, say, comics that were currently that they could talk about. In 2006, the magazine was changed with a bigger look and more pages, switching from the perfect bound to a staple free look to that of a more traditional magazine. Because traditional magazines you don't normally see staples. What you'll normally see is sort of like a glue back, where you'll see, like, say, okay, here's a endpoint, and this is where the glue in a way meets. And yeah, after like issue 200, Wizard made several changes to the magazine, shifting focus from reviews and humor to information about upcoming comics and the industry as a whole, which is fairly cool because, you know, back in 2006, I bet there was quite a lot of lot that, you know, would have been changing compared to, like, say, when it was back in, like, say, the 90s, or even at the beginning of the 2000s. And there was also a thing called Magic Word section, which consisted of reader questions, which, you know, which, like, say, hey, you would talk to, like, say, someone from the magazine and ask them specific questions. And then in November, an editor from it and co-founder, Pat McClellan, ended up being fired after more than a decade with the company. And they didn't kind of decline to say, hey, why was this? And in February 21st, 2007, Scott Gramling was announced as the new editor-in-chief. Soon after, like, longtime editor Brian Cumming was removed in August 2008. Seems like a lot of, like, you know, folks are suddenly leaving. And the final editor was a former staff writer and managing editor Mike Cotton. And then in 2009, Wizard laid off 10% of its workforce, including its 3 staff writers, in order to make room for freelance writers. I guess that would, you know, open the door to, say, you know, writers that are more independent, that, like, say, when it comes to freelance, maybe you would get someone's attention to someone who made a comic that really no one really knew about it. And then the comic was relaunched with issue 228 in August of 2010, which featured Mark Millar as a guest editor. And it kind of, in a way, returned to its strictly comic book roots. And that issue featured a Green Hornet film cover. If you don't remember, the Green Hornet was a film that had Seth Rogen in it, which was, in a way, trying to recreate the television show in a modern day with, you know, more common jokes.
Get out! Get save me! I'm unguessable!
More modern humor, and as well as a bit more of a darker tone to it as well. And also had a roundtable discussion with creators in the comic book film industry. So perhaps you would get, like, folks that would probably like say, hey, we think this idea to revitalize this IP as a film with Seth Rogen and all that was an idea that probably should have been done, because back in around this time, Seth Rogen was, yes, he is still big, but at the time he was slowly starting to become big because of, like, films like, say, Superbad and all that. But sadly, despite all these changes, Howard Menger was losing subscribers at a rate that was not good. And by 2010, its circulation was just 17,000 copies. That's not good. And January 24th, 2011, Rich Johnson of the website Bleeding Cool confirmed that the magazine would cease print publication, that almost all of its magazine staff had been laid off, and all freelance engagements were canceled. Honestly, like, say, what actually ended up causing this to, in a way, happen? There are several ideas because of, like, say, why this could have happened. Well, one of the reasons, like, this could happen was because of the internet. You know, people were suddenly going to check out things around the 2000s. Yes, like, you know, like, YouTube was still in its infancy around 2005, but by around, like, say, the 2010s, that was a bit of a change. Some of the features that this magazine had were things like Bookshelf, which was a brief description of the monthly trade paperback and hardcore collection issues. Top 10 writers and artists, listed charting of the most popular creators of the month in each category. And like say some of the retired features that they had when it came to the magazine was Casting Call, a feature proposing the dream cast for potential film adaptations of various film comics. It later appeared sporadically, so that means it happened and then suddenly, like, you know, every issue, suddenly this specific topic would appear. Another one that we got rid of was Last Man Standing, a dream face-off between two different characters or teams, always of different companies or universes. That in a way has come back in a way, like when it comes to the internet, with shows like, say, Death Battle. Or heck, even things like, say, Superpower Beatdown, in a way. And like, say, one thing this would was because one thing that this specific thing was, it was a feature would lead to a brief showdown between the two, including the victor, and would have a exclusive illustration. And yeah, that's honestly pretty cool. I remember, like, say, like, you know, fake comics, like say Constantine meets Doctor Strange, which is, I wish that had actually happened. There was also the Wizard Fan Awards. It was a annual, and presented the magazine presented the Wizard Fan Awards annually for works of distinction within the comic industry from 1993 to 2006. And the awards were presented at Dragon Con in 1994, and they were presented at Great Eastern Convention's Philadelphia Comic Book Spectator. And in 1995, the awards moved their home to the Chicago Comic Con, later named Wizard World Chicago, where they remained for, you know, until they eventually, you know, would, at least until, the last award was until 2006. But, honestly, like, when I think about it, I can see why, Wizard World magazine was really big, in that, sort of like, say, I grew up with Disney magazine, so, like, what this did was, you know, it talked about a specific thing that, you know, people loved, comics, and then it would have, like, say, a specific thing, like, say, hey, check out next month's issue of Turok, or perhaps check out, like, say, hey, here's an article talking about The Crow starring Brandon Lee, or perhaps something like, say, hey, a new revival of Superman is going to be written by a specific author and done by a specific artist. And that's honestly pretty cool. Yeah, at the same time, I understand, like, why it kind of, you know, slowly started to fade out, in a way, is that although I like to see comics as well, but suddenly you don't really see them get, like, say, when it comes to, like, say, media like this, you don't really see them as, like, say, something that people are going to, like, you know, get the next issue of, because mostly in that, whatever, like, say, unfortunately, like, whatever the specific thing they're going to be talking about, unfortunately, nowadays, we could just, like, look it up, and sadly, I don't like to say that, but unfortunately, that is what it is, and that, you know, like, if we wanted to, like, look up see an article about, like, a specific, current run, we could just, like, look it up, but at the same time, we'd have to know a new artist was doing that. But, sadly, like, I think this would have been a cool comic that I would have most definitely collected as well, a magazine I would have collected, and I kind of wish I could have, like, you know, like, listened, like, watched this, or, like, you know, collected these growing up. But that's just what I think about it. See you next time.